God be in my head and in my understanding. God be in mine eyes and in my looking. God be in my mouth and in my speaking. God be in my heart and in my thinking. God be at mine end and at my departing. Amen. Good morning. It's almost here. Today in the gospel reading, we learned about an angel appearing to Joseph, telling him not to set Mary aside because she was already pregnant with a child from the Holy Spirit. Mary was in her teens, and Joseph perhaps older. At that time, women who were pregnant without marriage were in disgrace to their community. Yet Joseph and Mary courageously persevered on the faith and love of their God. The gentle power and presence of Mary, even during a time when women were considered property, is amazing. Mary has been proclaimed by generations of followers of Jesus through the ages, and her spiritual presence has been a source of joy and healing even to this day. Christmas is coming, it's almost here, and for many of us, it may not necessarily be the joyful holiday that the ads on television and the internet would have us believe. In the busyness of our days, we hope that Christmas and Mary's message of joy won't be buried in the commercial hype, that buying the latest toy or car or electronic gadget will bring us peace and happiness. We hope we can remember and celebrate these holy days and not let them pass us by. So today I'm going to stray from the readings and tell you a story of a boy and his encounter with a homeless family. Feel free to close your eyes and immerse yourself in the story. Jason pressed his nose against the window glass and watched the falling snow. Across the street, a group of boys were making a snowman in the yard. Jason longed to be a part of the group, but he was new in the neighborhood, and he didn't feel good about getting on his coat and going across the street to play with them. He lived with his mom. They had just moved because she had changed jobs and had to move close to her work. His parents had divorced when he was very little, and his dad dropped out of their lives. Even though he never really knew his dad, he missed him. He had no friends in this new place. There had only been in this town a couple of weeks, and he wouldn't start school until after the Christmas holiday. He asked his mom if he could have a dog, but she didn't say much about it either way. He knew his mom couldn't afford much this Christmas, and he was sad that Christmas would pass him by. Jason watched the boys make the snowman, and he saw a small dog playing with them. Finally, the boys went inside their house, and the dog was left alone in the yard. Jason tapped on the window to get the dog's attention, and the dog happily crossed the street and came up on the porch to look at Jason through the window. He thought the dog was homeless. He had no collar, his coat was scraggly, and it was rough. Jason put on his jacket and his hat and went out on the porch to pet the dog. The dog let Jason come close and then suddenly dashed off the porch and partway down the sidewalk. He turned and looked at Jason as if to say, "Are you going to follow me?" Jason went down the stairs toward the dog, which took off again and went down the block, looking back occasionally to see if Jason was following him. Jason had a feeling the dog was trying to lead him somewhere. At the end of the block, the dog dashed across the street and into an alley that Jason had not seen before. It was a narrow alley and well hidden behind the houses in the street. It was growing dark, but Jason could still see the dog as he followed him. Finally, the dog stopped outside a very small shed that looked like it was going to fall over. He sat down and waited for Jason to catch up. The shed was in bad shape, and the door was leaning on one hinge. Since there was no lock on the door, Jason was able to open the door and peek in. The dog slipped past him and went inside. Even though it was very dark inside, Jason sensed the dim light, and his eyes adjusted quickly. In a far corner of the shed, he spotted a wheelbarrow filled with old burlap sacks. Behind the wheelbarrow, he noticed a woman who was resting on more burlap bags and a man sitting close to her. He cautiously came closer and noticed there was a baby asleep in the wheelbarrow. Jason did not feel afraid as he neared the sleeping baby and the man and the woman. The woman smiled at him, and he saw that she was welcoming him to see the baby up close. The man continued to sleep in the corner, and the dog curled up in the man's lap. Jason really didn't know what to make of the scene, but he was drawn to the baby. He felt a warming throughout his body as he looked at the sleeping child. Jason sat down and took in the quiet moments inside the shed. He felt surrounded by the love that was apparent, and he also felt a happiness that he had not experienced in a very long time. After a time, he looked up and noticed the woman had also fallen asleep. He quietly got up and tiptoed out of the shed, leaving the family in peace. The dog didn't follow him out. All the way back home, Jason tried to make sense of what he saw and what the little dog had led him to. The next morning, Jason woke up to the sight of more snow and the smell of breakfast. He rushed downstairs and hurriedly ate his breakfast. He wanted to go back to the shed and take his best winter wool scarf as a present to the baby so the baby would be warm. He wanted to tell his mom all about what he had seen the day before, but for some reason he chose to stay silent. She did notice he seemed happier than he had been and was glad for that. When Jason walked out on the porch and down the stairs, he saw no sign of the dog he had seen earlier. The snow was deeper and still falling. Jason hurried down the block, crossed the street, and raced down the alley toward the shed. He stopped where he thought the shed would be, but there was no shed with a door on one hinge. He looked all around and even went farther down the alley. No shed. He saw a man shoveling snow in his backyard. Jason asked the man about the shed, but he just shook his head and continued to shovel snow. He wanted to explain everything to the man, but he saw it was no use. Jason walked home deep in thought. He had many questions in his mind, but he had the distinct feeling he had seen something he was meant to see. He no longer felt lonely. Christmas had not passed him by. May we all be like Jason and feel the warm, welcoming smile of Mary's love for us all.